So we're going to be reading chapters 21 and 22 of The Prairie Thief. Chapter 21, Sudden Moves. Suddenly, Jessamine gasped. Her eyes went wide with horror. Louisa, she cried, I came all the way over here to tell you, and I forgot. Tell me what? The sheriff came to our house this morning. They found enough men for the jury. Your pa's trial starts tomorrow. What? Louisa felt drawn by panic. Tomorrow? I have to go. I have to be there. She would have run out the door right that second, but the brownie took hold of her skirts. Now don't be hasty, he said, shoving his cap back into place with his free hand. His eyes were bright and wet. He turned to Jessamine. What exactly did the sheriff want with your uncle? He wanted him to come to town. They're all going. Uncle Malcolm, Aunt Mattie, and the boys. They're packing up to leave right now. I'm staying behind to see to the chores. The sheriff needs my uncle to bear witness at the trial about the stolen goods he found in this dugout. Her eyes went wide. Oh, you can save your pa, Louisa. Just go and tell them about the brownie and how he was only borrowing things to cheer up his wife. I don't think they can send a brownie to jail, can they? She wrinkled her nose doubtfully. Louisa and the brownie looked at each other. For one flashing moment, hope welled up inside her, but it ebbed away just as quickly. The brownie glowered at her with the same surly hostility as always, but she saw now that behind it was something else. He was terribly, terribly afraid. I can't tell about him, she said at last, turning to Jessamine. They might not put him in jail, but they'd try to catch him for sure and study him and keep him for a pet, like as not. No, she shook her head. It wouldn't be right. My mother wouldn't have done it. The brownie gave her a long, sharp stare. You know, he said in his voice so gruff it was nearly a growl. You look just like her, the spitting image. Louisa smiled, but in her heart the fear was stabbing again. Winthrop's taunt came back to her. Your pa's gonna hang. She couldn't save Pa by telling who the real thief was, but she couldn't let him be hanged either. She tried to think of what she could do, but nothing came to mind. Nothing at all, except to go and be with him and beg the judge to be merciful. I have to go to town, she said. I have to see to Pa. But you'll never get there in a day, Jessamine said. Not on foot. 13 miles, it's too far. Louisa swallowed back tears. She needed to be there. Suppose she was too late and they convicted him, sentenced him, carried out the sentence. Suppose she never saw him alive again. It was not to be borne. I have to get there, she said. I'll walk all night if I have to. Pish tosh. And horse feathers, interrupted the brownie. There's no need for you to walk anywhere, goose. I've arranged a ride for ye. You'd been on your way half an hour ago if you'd not tricked me into telling you me life story. Impertinence. I'll see to it you get there in time, if you'll mind your manners and speak softly, and make no sudden movements, he added as an afterthought. A ride, Louisa began, but before she could ask any questions, the brownie put his fingers in his mouth and he whistled loud, sharp, and long. He stared out beyond Pa's fields into the southern prairie, squinting. Louisa stared too, and in a moment she saw a dark blur of movement, growing larger. Something was rushing toward them, rapidly in a gallop. A horse? A stab of thrilling joy went through her. Had the brownies summoned a wild pony? There were herds of them out on the open prairie, Pa said. I can't possibly, Louisa thought. Oh, how lovely! I'm going to. But the blur sped closer and wasn't a pony at all. It was lean and bony with coarse looking brown and white fur and black horns curving up from a long tapered head. A pronghorn antelope? I'm going to ride a pronghorn? She asked in disbelief. The brownie stroked his beard and gave a satisfied chuckle. Indeed, ye are. It's a first in the history of the world, I believe, so I hope it's grateful ye are. But how? Louisa sputtered. It's the fastest thing I ever saw, breathed Jessamine. You'll get there in no time. But shit with your butts, scolded the brownie. Hold still now. Mind what I say about no sudden moves. The pronghorn slowed as it entered the barnyard. Walking, it seemed a clumsy, ungainly thing, head bobbing low, giving little nervous snorts. It kept some distance between itself and the girls, its brown eyes rolling warily. "'Tis good o' ye to come," said the brownie softly, very slowly spreading his hands in a welcoming sort of gesture. "The lass is aware of the immense honour." Louisa wanted to nod, but she was afraid of startling the animal. The brownie's warnings had been so emphatic. She had the sense that the pronghorn might turn and bolt at the slightest provocation. How on earth was she supposed to ride it? "He can cover 60 miles in an hour unencumbered," said the brownie. "He'll go slower with a great goose aboard. Mind ye hold on tight now." Chapter 22. A First in the History o' the World. Once on the Once on one of the few trips to Fletcher Louisa had ever made, she and Pa had stopped to watch a train pulling out of the station. Louisa had never seen a train before. It was bigger and longer than she had imagined possible. The great curving wall of locomotive, like a house made of metal, and half a dozen more houses lined up behind it. It had inched forward slowly at first, the black steam billowing out of a fat stovepipe. Slow, slow, then faster, faster, picking up speed, whistles screaming, then as fast as wild ponies racing away from the town at top speed. That was what riding a pronghorn was like. The brownie had directed her to place the milking stool beside the animal's back, slowly, slowly, to boost herself up. She slid her leg across its back, afraid to breathe, afraid of pulling its hair or hurting it with her knee, afraid of kicking over the stool or doing anything wrong that might startle it and crush her one chance to make it to town in time for Pa's trial. Such slow, creeping work, getting herself astride the creature, and then, whoosh! She was racing out of the barnyard like a train, faster than the train, bouncing, jangling. Oh, it was terrible. Her teeth knocked against each other and she couldn't catch her breath. The pronghorn's back was rigid with bony knobs. She would be black and blue before they got to the boundary of Pa's land, if she could even manage to hold on for that long. Jessamine yelled something after her. She couldn't tell what. The pronghorn rolled its eyes back, peering at Louisa, but she was bouncing so hard she couldn't focus. She felt herself sliding back towards its rump and clamped her legs together in panic. Suppose she flew right off the back end? With her legs squeezing tight against the pronghorn's sides, riding was suddenly easier. The tighter she squeezed, the less she bounced. She hoped she wasn't squeezing too tight, but then it occurred to her that being squeezed was probably less annoying to the pronghorn than having something heavy bouncing on its back over and over. She leaned forward, holding tight to its muscular neck, feeling the coarse fur against her face. Her hair was everywhere, and so were her skirts. Flapping fabric could startle a horse, but there was no way she was letting go to tuck anything in. The pronghorn seemed to know which way it's going. Louisa hoped it did. She certainly wasn't about to try to steer it. Across the ruffled prairie, she could see the green ribbon of trees marked the creek line all the way to Fletcher. If she'd been hiking on foot, she'd have cut to the creek first and followed its muddy path to town. But the pronghorn kept to the open plain, loping roughly parallel to the creek, but not venturing near it. Perhaps the terrain was too rough there. She had no sense of how rapidly they were traveling. Faster than she had ever moved before, even on a galloping horse, that was sure. The pronghorn moved so differently. The two movements of its legs was at once stiff and smooth, like two sorts of pendulums swinging together, then apart, in unison. Louisa stopped trying to think of what it was like and just let herself ride and feel. Two kinds of wind, hot prairie breeze and cool rush of air from the speed, prickly fur, an earthy, rank smell, like Evangeline but weedier, greener. Sun on her arms, sun hot on her hair, an ache in her leg muscles. She was glad of the ache. The exertion required to keep her seat. It eased the knot inside her. She wondered where the pronghorn would put her down. On the one hand, it would be rather exciting to be carried right into town this way, the only human ever to ride a pronghorn, the brownie had said. Imagine the look on Mrs. Smirch's face. On the other hand, it was hard to imagine any creature as skittish as the brownie had cautioned her this one was, daring to trot boldly up the main street of a human township. She felt rather shy about doing such a thing herself, come to think of it. I must be a sight, she thought, hair like a tumbleweed and streaks of dirt on my dress. She began to hope fervently that the pronghorn would drop her on the edge of town, where she might at least wash her face in the creek and braid her hair before she entered town in search of the courthouse. In all the excitement of the brownie's tale and the pronghorn's arrival, she had clean forgotten to grab her bundle of clothes and food. But it was still early in the day, and the sky was hot and clear. Perhaps if she could get the pronghorn to stop on the outskirts of town, she could rinse out her dress in the creek, and let it dry before nightfall. The trial wasn't to start until the morrow. There was time. Even if her clothes didn't dry all the way, a clean, damp dress would be better than a filthy, dry one.